Hi, I'm Richard Bounds, host for today's episode of Funnel Vision. Today I have the pleasure of being joined by Mike Slater. I've known Mike for sadly nearly 30 years and we've worked together and I've worked for him on three separate occasions. I knew this would be an insightful episode, but it really doesn't let anybody down. We talk about how personalization is key, how sales is evolving, and how AI is adapting and making that change. Really enjoy the episode. I hope you do too. Thank you. Yeah, hi Mike. Good morning. Nice to speak to you today. Nice sunny day. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, Rich. I'm very well, thank you. How are you doing?
Very good, thank you. And welcome to Funnel Vision, the new podcast that we're organising, which really focuses on all things sales, but with a leaning to AI and the future of sales and the impact that AI is having. Clearly, we've known each other a long time. Do you know it's 29 years actually that when we first met as salespeople at CompuWare, and obviously a lot's happened since. You've gone on to great things. You've held a number of C-level positions at Software AG and Serrala, at UK MD at SAP. Be really interesting to know a little bit more about what you're actually up to now, though, Mike.
Yeah, no, thanks, Rich. So, as you say, I've had quite a few senior leadership roles in sales, but I'd always say that I learned my trade where we met, which is at CompuWare. I mean, the training was exceptional, and I think I got lucky that we had that kind of training. Not sure if I would have been as successful or lucky to achieve what I have achieved if it wasn't for that really good grounding. And you know, when you go from leading a team to leading an organization, particularly like Software AG, when you're leading people all over the world, you have to then become an operator. You have to think a little bit more about how do you scale those best practices that you do it maybe at a team level. So I think that was quite a interesting sort of change in my career, particularly also learning new cultures, how each individual culture sells differently. I would say that I've learned a lot in the last few roles, which were private equity backed roles, very different to corporate backed environments, much higher pace of change, which actually I enjoy. You can actually get things done, which is much more interesting. And most recently, I'm now with a private equity firm, Carlyle European Technology Partners, advising their businesses on how to scale and grow their go-to-market engines from marketing through to sales execution.
Excellent. Okay, so I bet that's really pretty interesting. So you're sitting across a number of companies, supporting them with that growth strategies?
Yeah, well, we have about 25, 26 organizations or portfolio companies in our portfolio. Yeah. I can't obviously get across all of those in any depth, but probably 5 or 6 maximum at any one time, where we're really going in, strategizing, and then looking at how we execute best practice changes.
Okay, excellent. And obviously you've had a sort of diverse career. It may be interesting to understand a bit more about what you've done to sort of manage the different cultures and things. Maybe we come back to that because you said that was a kind of interesting challenge with the global teams. But what for you have been like the most significant kind of career steps so far?
Yeah, so I think Software AG is a good one just because you did have to be nimble enough and empathetic enough to understand those different backgrounds and cultures. And while you might have patterns of best practice, you know, some of them you have to finesse slightly for those different cultures, understanding how they work, how they operate. And then, of course, you know, when you're going into the private equity world, again, you realize that sometimes things are not as optimized as you might have experienced in large corporate organizations such as SAP, and you're putting in best practices, but it's really important that you bring the team with you. If you just go in and say, right, this is what we're doing now, it just never lands. I mean, you can have the best playbook in the world, but how do you know salespeople are actually executing against that when they're with the customer, with nobody in the room with them other than the customer, you need to make sure that it's easy for them to consume and is value to them. Otherwise, look, we both in salespeople, we know what it's like, right? We don't like to do things that we feel doesn't make sense to how we can improve our execution.
Okay. And do you have a few sort of like top tips in terms of how do you ensure that that playbook is actually people are listening to you and they adopt it and they're working to it day in, day out?
Well, I always get the leadership teams, but also some of the top salespeople, let's call them stakeholders, to sort of co-author what's needed. I mean, everybody actually has a clear idea of what works, what doesn't work, and it's just putting those together and making sure that you can point everybody in the right direction. So making them feel part of that journey is really, really important. That's a key top tip. And then less is more. Don't, boil the ocean. You've heard that phrase before, but what are the one or two things that can really help the teams move the needle? And then the adoption works. And then the other thing I always say is you say something once and it doesn't land. You need to say things at least 10 times before the penny drops and it becomes habitual. So enablement, communication, clarity of message, all of these things are so, so important.
Yeah. Okay. And that reiteration comes from the ambassadors, if you like, the sort of the salespeople, the leaders, and yourself, and just to make sure that message is reinforced, and each one of them repeats it multiple times, and so on. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I mean, there's always terrorists that don't like change,
Yeah.
but sometimes if you get them on the bus and they communicate it to their peers, it's much, much more powerful than their managers saying, "Look, this is the way we need to run."
Yeah. And as a matter of interest, because I saw something similar when around the European team. There's a different dynamic in Germany and France than there might be in Sweden or the UK. How do you manage that change, recognizing those different cultures? And you've done it on a global basis as well.
Yeah, look, I think there's been quite a bit of trial and error. There's very different ways of selling in different countries, and sometimes you realize that certain things don't translate that well. But it sounds corny, but I'll say it's like seek to understand before being understood. Even though you have an idea of what you think will work, just listen to what they think is important and what they think the issues are before going in with the solution. So I think that was I guess that's what I've learned through trial and error over time.
Okay, cool. Seek to understand first. Cool. And without wishing to sound like two sort of middle-aged guys talking about sales and how it's changed and so on, and I know you're younger than me, but what do you think's been kind of the biggest change in sales in the time we've been in this arena?
I mean, there's so many. It's difficult to pin any one thing down. But what I would say is that, I think sales cycles are much, much more complex than they ever used to be. You've got decreased customer responsiveness, information overload, a lot of pressure to do more with less. And people don't buy for fun anymore. I remember the days when we used to call up someone who we had a good relationship with and ask them for a favour. Can they get a deal done for us within a quarter, or buy something because it's the end of the year? Those days are gone, long gone, and not one person makes a decision anymore. And so if you think about the current economic pressures in particular, value selling or ROI selling is more necessary than ever. Before, I think it was just a best practice, but now it's a must-have way of approaching. And I think buyers are definitely more switched on, so they expect personalization rather than that used to be a differentiation. They expect you to understand them, and then you've got all the other complexities like increased governance and which you never had before, which can add months to a sales cycle.
Okay. And I mean, you're in an interesting position sitting across a number of companies at the moment in a kind of advisory capacity, but do you see like common challenges across each of them, and what are those kind of key challenges that you're seeing today?
Yeah, well, without wanting to sound like a dinosaur, I think a lot of the best practice principles that you and I used to work to, you said 29 years ago, I think it's only 28, but anyway, um,
Okay.
those a lot of them still are relevant today. In fact, I would say they're even more relevant. So, for example, when you think of B2B selling, getting around many people in your buying center has always been something you should do, but now you have to, right? Because if you just deal with one or two people, there are some people that salespeople that work that way. They just deal with one or two people who they've built a relationship up with. Well, they're
Yeah.
probably missing 80% of all of those in the buying decision process, which is massively high risk. You might get lucky now and then, but it's not really a sales strategy. So those kind of things, which we sort of knew 20 odd years ago, now it's just critical. So that I think those kind of things, and then I mentioned value selling, ROI selling as well. Just those two things. If you can just nail those and be brilliant at those two things, it will significantly improve your performance and outcome. That's what the A players do
Yeah.
consistently. Yeah.
Okay. And you're helping the companies you work with to implement those two things in terms of like value-based selling and personalization, etc. As standard. That's
Yeah. Look, I mean, obviously, if that's their biggest thing that's holding them back, right? So if they're already doing that as a standard, fine. But then it might be about pipeline generation, and that could be just having the clarity of message as to why you exist as an organization. A lot of organizations haven't even thought about that, right? They just are an also-ran solution trying to compete in a very crowded market. You really need to have that clarity of message as to why you stand out. That's when you get others, within the ecosystem, whether it's analysts or partners or even customers themselves, start talking about you and selling for you, rather than you having to do some marketing campaigns all the time. And you
yeah.
need to get to that world, but that only works if everyone gets you and understands why you stand out, and that will dictate often your sales pitch, your sales demos, your presentations, who you target from a marketing perspective. Could even dictate your product strategy as well. So that's often a big one. But if I was to summarize it very quickly, you just need to know where you're placing your bets and why. You
Yeah.
need to constantly build pipeline, not just when you've closed your deals, but you've got to constantly do that at an organizational level. And then the third thing is, deal execution excellence. Those best practices that we know work time and time again.
Yeah. Perfect. I think there's three tips there: the bets, the pipeline, and execution excellence. I think if people are doing that, they're on the right path, aren't they? So,
Exactly.
do you have a sort of a secret sauce in terms of how you get that implemented within, if you're moving from company A to company B within Carlyle and you're trying to enforce those three kind of measures? Do you have a way of doing that as well?
Well, it does take the organization to realize that this is something that is important to them. So, first of all, you've got to understand the priorities. Even if something makes sense, if it's number 6 on the list of priorities, it will never land. It
Yeah.
needs to be number 1 or number 2. So, there's no point in pushing something if the organization or the management team don't feel this is the thing they really got to focus on. So, that's the key thing. And then, as I mentioned, they have to co-author this so that
Yeah.
they really own it. And then it's just not doing everything at once. It's just picking the bits that really matter the most, usually where they've already got feeling the pain. A bit like selling, right? You sell to pains. The organization needs to realize that this challenge or pain, business pain, is holding them back. And by addressing it, it could take them on the journey to achieve their strategic goals.
Okay. That's good. And do you see how technology, in particular AI technology, can help you implement some of those objectives?
Yeah, look, I think that tech, there's lots of new tools. I would call it a tech stack rather than one particular tool. But you've got your call intelligence solutions that sort of can optimize how you pitch to customers and what things work, what things don't work. I like revenue intelligence tools because they take a lot of the very manual but also very error prone ways of actually trying to understand what's going on with your sales cycles and your CRM. It's a very good way of coaching people in best practices because they can see, oh, I have low engagement here, or I'm not dealing with all the right people there. But having that surfaced up in a really easy to consume way is important. So those tools are ones I often recommend. But again, it's how do you get a quick win? Some of them work with certain CRMs and others. So if they don't have the right technical stack, we might have a different process. But AI is clearly something that is a massive opportunity for salespeople. I don't buy all of this, AI is going to make salespeople redundant or SDRs redundant, at least not in the near future. And the reason I say that is that it's just not personalized enough yet. It just doesn't quite work enough to be fooled into thinking this is a human being talking to me. And it's so irritating when you get, what is clearly not a human being trying to reach out. So I don't think it's quite there, but where AI can really help is just taking out the burden of research. The salespeople, or good salespeople, should really understand their customer, do a lot of research, preparing for meetings, all of those things. This personalization thing that I mentioned to you. Well, AI is amazing for that. There's amazing how quickly you can get really relevant information. Even account planning. I mean, I've seen people just type in, like, can you build an account plan for me for this account? These are their challenges, based upon external information, and this is our internal data. And you'd be so shocked and surprised how good that account plan would be. Yeah. And that's gold dust to many, many salespeople. The danger is that it makes salespeople lazy. So it's all very well preparing it, but unless they internalize it and really understand what it's giving them, then it's useless, right? The salesperson has to then apply it. And I think that's the nuance that where I say AI can't actually replace salespeople yet.
Okay. So there's a few things in there, Mike, to be fair. So just picking up on that last one in terms of the how salespeople are using AI, best practice around like research and personalization. I think do you see that as a kind of a tool set that the rock stars are going to be implementing and using?
Yeah, the good salespeople will be doing that naturally. It doesn't mean the average salesperson is doing that. So, yeah. But I think it will become just a standard. I mean, I'm going to tell you a funny story that you might not even remember. When I think you joined CompuWare a couple of months before me.
I did,
and we didn't even have laptops then, or email. I remember that, no. And I was a little bit jealous of you because you got a laptop before me, and I still had my paper files, and you got it 4 weeks before I did. This is back in 1997, and then you closed the deal with the person you were struggling to get hold of on the phone, and I remember you saying, "Yeah, I just emailed him." And I just thought, wow, that's amazing. He managed to close a deal and got hold of the customer with email. I understood email from an internal perspective, but believe it or not, emailing an external customer was a strange concept back then. I mean, this is showing our age. Obviously, we still look far too young for people to believe that this is a real story. But
we didn't know about email, yeah.
So that, but now, just a few months later, or even like a year later, it was just like a standard thing that we did after that, right? I don't think email can replace face-to-face meetings or phone calls, but it was another very useful tool. And AI is a bit like that. I think that it's still in its infancy, but it's just going to be standard. It's going to be bog standard, and this is how you prepare for a meeting. It's just the way, as the same way people use email, or the same way people use phones without it thinking that this is an amazing technology. That's what's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. And as an interesting story, because do you think with kind of email, the digital transformation, etc., it was obviously massive. Out of 10, that's maybe sort of an 8 or 9 out of 10 from a sales transformation perspective. How big do you think AI is going to be by comparison?
So I still think it's slightly overhyped. And again, maybe I'm a dinosaur. I think that it's going to make salespeople be able to cut through a lot of the information overload
Yeah,
and get to the really important things, and then use those with much more impact with customers. You have to also bear in mind that AI is going to help buyers as well. So at the moment, I think customers don't really know how to buy, uh, software in particular, but IT. So I think they'll cotton on to using AI of how do I buy this? What's the best way of getting it into my organization? Da, 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 da. Um, and then the personalization piece is the piece where, or the relationship, let's call it that, that will be the true differentiator. So I think salespeople still need to have I'll call it the emotional intelligence to apply the information to then stand out from the crowd and stand out from competitors. But it will be expected rather than, today it's a differentiator that might help you with your sales cycle. I think in the future it's just going to be, if you're not there, game over.
yeah. So it can help you as well as some of the things you highlighted before in terms of structure and best practice, and that's more the science, but it's still the art of interpreting and personalizing the information the right way is going to help the cream AEs rise to the top, I suppose. Yeah.
I think so. I mean, time will tell, and then
Yeah.
5, 10 years time, you can tell me, Mike, you were so wrong. But yeah, I don't think people will be able to replace the nuance of the A-player salesperson just through AI. It'll give them tools to be able to do that, but I don't think it's going to, mean that. I think people just still like to buy from people, and I think that will always be the case,
Yeah.
for something that's complex.
Yeah. Just one last quick question on this topic, if I may. You talked about, I think, like deal intelligence and revenue intelligence, obviously helping with, helping with forecast accuracy and win rates, etc. Are they things that, what business impact have you seen from implementing those type of solutions?
Well, deal intelligence, I think, provided you apply it, because a lot of salespeople put the intelligence that they get. So methodologies like MedPick, for example, building business cases for metrics and getting to all the right people with the economic buyer and champion and so on. It gives them the information, but they still have to go do those things. They still have to be able to execute. So subject to the execution, which is the bit that it makes an A player. I've seen deal sizes grow sixfold. At Software AG, you might remember the average deal size originally was about 89K, and within 18 months it was 610K. So we see that's a huge increase in the average deal size just by applying those intelligence pieces. But we did it in a manual way back then, and then increasing the average conversion rate. If you know your ideal customer profile, at the moment it relies on salespeople to sort of sniff it out just through experience. But actually, if you use these tools that tell you if you're dealing with the right kind of customer and engaging properly and engaging regularly, you can significantly reduce the sales cycle and increase the conversion. So that's what I see a lot. But you've got to be a little bit careful because, well, two things, right? There's this surveillance type culture that creeps in, particularly the call tracking solutions like Gong and Salesloft and so on. It's fine recording a conversation, but does the customer know they're being recorded and all of those things? And even salespeople, right? That they need to know that this is something that's a coaching tool that can help them, and they share in seeing the insights rather than it's an inspection from management. Otherwise, you get this kind of risk surveillance culture.
Yeah, no, I fully understand. I think from an ethics perspective, I guess that obviously if you let the customer know and you give them the opt-out option, that perhaps helps alleviate some of that. And I think I agree, salespeople from having their calls listened into, there can be some that are they ready, not ready to kind of adopt or embrace the new world. But I think if they have chance to see their meetings back, capture what was really said, and see other people's meetings from a kind of, if you're a new starter and I can see the best performers and just go and see key moments from their meetings, can be really powerful to help with onboarding, etc. But there is still everyone needs to be aware of why we're doing it and brought into some of the principles and so on. And what might be a win for one person is perhaps not the win for the company. So it might just be time saving on CRM data entry or something like that. So yeah.
No, I mean, it's back to the human application of it. If you have sensible leaders who get
Yeah.
what you just said, they'll apply it in the right way. But if you have let's call it a mediocre leader that just doesn't understand how it might be perceived by others, it could be used in a very blunt way. So it just needs to be applied properly. Yeah.
Yeah, and just one thing, I think it'd be remiss if I didn't go back on the pretty much 6 times multiplier on average deal size that you were able to kind of secure at Software AG, and I do, in fairness, remember that really very well. And I think for me there was almost like three key things. It was belief that it was possible. It was kind of a transition to very much more kind of value based selling and so on. And I think the third was the whole kind of execution and scorecarding and that kind of adopting, wasn't quite medic at the time, but that methodology. Do you think they're the 3 key bits, or is there something else kind of missing? Because that's a massive change, that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was just those things. There was a few things. I mean, first of all, you've got to hire the right people, I think, and a lot of organisations underestimate how important that is. So, and having a super thorough hiring process. It's also partly why we hired you, Rich, as well. So,
Yeah, scrape through.
just about made it. So yeah, a very rigorous hiring process. So you're getting the top talent. You can give people skills, but you can't give them talent. So you need to make sure you're getting that. So that was one key thing. The other one was, before we were just bidding everything. So if we had an invitation to tender, then we would go after it. But actually, if you receive a tender and you don't know about it in the first place, you have like a 4% success rate. So we banned responding to tenders, and we then had hunters that went out to find the right opportunities. That's an old-fashioned version of knowing your ideal customer profile and going after those. And then, as you said, it was the execution piece. So a very rigorous process to make sure that those methodologies weren't just a PowerPoint slide and a concept, but were really instituted, and the hard things in those methodologies. It's easy to say build a business case. It's not that easy to build a business case. It's easy to say get to sea level. It's not that easy to get to sea level. So really, training and coaching everyone to be able to execute exceptionally well. And then I think we also realized that there were combinations of products where if we sold them as a platform, it was very difficult for competition to beat us. Whereas if we sold just one product, well then, but there were some things we did better, there were some things the competition did better. So we then pushed everybody towards selling what we knew it resonated with the customers, but had very, very, very high win ratio because competition simply couldn't touch us. So those are the main components of that.
Yeah, and I recall as well we had clarity about the value of those differentiators when we did group the whole portfolio together.
That's a really good point. Yeah, so the business case piece, it's fine building a business case, but you still need to make sure your solution stands out in the business case. So can you even quantify your differentiators and match those to the top business priorities?
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. I've just got a couple of quick questions about the sort of future of sales. And I know we've touched on some of this, so I can just, you highlighted already, you don't think it's necessarily going to take jobs AI as such from a sales perspective. But how do you think sales will change over the next 5 years? If you can get your crystal ball out.
Yeah, I think you're going to have a sales culture of data-driven insights much more. I think what you have now are probably 20% of the best sales organizations use these as a standard. I think that's going to become the norm within the next 5 years. So everybody will have these insights, and everybody will be able to see where the red flags are, and see where the best opportunities are. The problem with that is, so will your competitors be doing those things? So then you're going to have to find another thing to stand out, and this is where exceptional personalization and I guess you could say the talent piece, which would be difficult to artificially copy, is going to be even more of a differentiator.
And can I just pick, like, how do you do like exceptional personalization? Because everyone's trying to do personalization, but how do you make it like really exceptional, go above everybody else?
Look, a lot of customers find it stressful to buy.
Yeah.
You may you've responded to tenders before, and in the tender it will probably say, this is the process, this is when we're going to make a decision, this is when we're going to shortlist, this is when we're going to award, this is when we're going to contract. I can't even remember the last time a deal landed within those timescales that were set in that sort of roadmap, which tells you that actually customers are not used to managing the sales cycle, don't really know how long it takes or how complex it is. So if you can be that trusted advisor and coach a customer through the process, in theory, as a salesperson, you've sold 50 to 100 times before. That customer, unless they're in procurement, probably has only ever bought solutions maybe once in their career, maybe for a very different company altogether. So if you can if you can talk the language of the captains of industry, and you can make them feel safe, in you, right? Almost like their therapist. Then this is how you differentiate. I mean, but I know that there are AI therapists these days, so you never know, right? But I'm not sure if a C-level economic buyer is going to feel safe or buy because AI's told them this is the way they want to go. I don't know, but yeah, I think that's how you differentiate.
Yeah. So coaching them on the process, the steps, the potential challenges, etc., along the journey in a human way, not necessarily AI perspective. So
yeah, a lot of salespeople are just reactive. Okay, this is the sales. What do you want to see? What's your process? And they follow the process. But actually, the best salespeople guide the customer through and coach them through the process.
Perfect. Really interesting insight, Mike. Thank you for that. Just a couple of big questions I'm just going to ask you at the end. So you've done a lot of deals. I've seen you do a lot of deals, and I know you've been involved as a leader in a lot of big deals as well. But you must have like a favourite deal of all time, and why?
Oh, I've got lots of favourite deals, Rich. But I think the favourite deal was one we did with Walgreens Boots Alliance. It was about $30 million, if I remember.
3-0.
Yeah. So it was a very important deal. And the reason why it was my favourite deal was not just the size or the complexity, but the salesperson was a pain in the arse. I mean, and I won't mention him here, but you probably know who he is, but just a nightmare. Really difficult to manage, really difficult, and probably you'd question whether he'd be the right person for that particular deal. That said, and the reason why he was a pain in the arse is that we had a very clear methodology that we wanted to follow, and I think that he resisted a lot of those things. The thing was, he was actually quite coachable. So eventually, he would go away and do the things that we asked him to do, and he had a lot of help with some great technical members of the team. Now, the reason why it's my favourite deal was obviously we landed it. It was a great celebration. And to this day, that awkward salesperson who didn't quite buy into doing these things now is the biggest advocate of them. He's now a senior sales leader, and he coaches his sales team on these exactly the same methodologies that he was resisting, whatever it was, 12, I know, where are we now? About 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So, that's so it stood its test of time, right? The things that worked quite well then clearly are being implemented now. And they were just little tricks, right? So a specific example on that deal was that we had something like 26 versions of the business case.
Right.
Not because we got it wrong 25 times, but because we took it to a different person within the buying centre. So we took it to 25 different individuals, and they all sort of finessed the business case slightly, which meant that you had 26 people with their paw prints in this business case, and essentially this was our hunting license. So we could say, right, we built the case with Fred and Andrew and Sharon, but we also understand you're important. Can we check it meets with your approval as well? And that allowed us to meet with all these other people because they had the fear of missing out. They wanted to also understand it in a bit more detail. And a large proportion of those 26 people were on the steering committee for the decision. So it's almost impossible for them to say no because they had influence on that business case. So just a really powerful example of how the business case is not just to convince people, but it's also to get a wide audience to buy in and gives you that hunting license to go to the next person to get their input on whether this makes sense for the organisation. So yeah, just a good example of best practice.
Brilliant. Okay, and I do remember that deal. I'm not going to mention any names, but I did that particular AE in all my time in sales. I think is probably the best I've ever come across at building relationships with people, and also really interesting about the business case and the 25, 26 versions of that, because I think that business case journey is kind of well underutilized still in a lot of companies I'm working with. And it also goes back to why you love that so much. It goes back to your point at the beginning when you're implementing kind of best practice approach. You might have some rebels along the way, and then you can turn them into your the biggest advocates. And it sounds like that person is now one of the biggest advocates, which is great. So yeah, good story. Thanks, Mike. If you had one particular sort of deal hack, like your one biggest tip, I mean, it could be leaning in some of the things we've discussed, but what do you think that would be for sales success on a deal?
Am I allowed to? Well, it's one, but can I make it three?
Yeah.
So look, you can talk about MedPick, you can talk about scorecards, you can do all these things, but there's what I call 3 deal disciplines. The first one is, are you talking to all the right people, and qualifying that they're the right people, not just a talker, but they are a true mobilizer. The next one is making sure that they believe in the value of the deal. So this is the business case piece that we mentioned, and then the third discipline is agreeing the process and timescales to close. So the mutual closing plan or mutual success plan, and regularly reviewing that. Don't just do it once. On a regular basis, review that. And in fact, the deals that close on the day that they're forecasted are ones where so the last 3 weeks of a deal, they'll do like a 5-minute check-in to make sure that mutual plan is still on track, right? So if you can do those 3 things really, really well, you have a very, very strong deal, right? All the right people tell you how when you can get your deal done, and they believe in the value of your deal. You're in a strong position. Any one of those are missing, you're at risk, because if you're not talking to the right people, it doesn't matter about the value or the mutual plan, or if they don't believe in the value, fine. If they're talking to the right people, then it's at risk if they don't truly believe in the value. And the last thing is, if they haven't told you how and when you can get a deal done, well, how can you forecast it? Right? It's just a date in your head, not in the customer's head. So those are the 3 deal disciplines that I look for in all large deals, and if you can make sure you're covering those, you're in good shape.
Okay, good advice. Thank you. And you've had an excellent career, as we said before, lots of senior positions, different types of companies, and so on. Is there anything you'd have done differently as you look at it now?
I mean, there'll be many things that I would have done differently. I think things that I've learned from as a leader are, you know, when you know someone's not going to work out, then you should act, sooner rather than later. It's not fair to that individual to allow it to carry on, and it never, very rare that it turns around. It's not impossible, but it's very, very rare. But probably, the biggest sort of mistake I made that impacted my career in a way that maybe I wouldn't have chosen is where I made a commitment to a quarter number that I didn't believe in, but my boss made me commit. And I ended up achieving what I thought I'd achieve, but it was way short of what my boss was pressurizing me to forecast. So my advice to anybody is, if you take ownership for what it is you're doing, but don't take somebody else's number if you haven't got a path to achieving that. It's a strategy of hope, and sales is more complex than hope.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that's a challenge everybody has probably faced, being asked to hit a number that's almost impossible. I guess your number was quite a big one, but even if you're like an individual contributor, what kind of advice would you give, if you're being challenged to hit a number that's way above what you see as achievable? I guess honesty is always the best policy, but any other guidance?
Well, reliability is the best policy, right? People want people they can rely on and trust. So it's no good just saying, sorry, I can't hit that number. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
What you need to do is say, this is what I have confidence in, and these are the reasons why. And this is what I'm doing about trying to address the fact that I have a gap or can't see how I can get there right now. But you still have to be taking positive action to do what might seem impossible, but never commit 100% that you will do the impossible.
Okay, so in effect, to recognise that you have a gap, but to build a plan and share the plan to plug it.
Yeah, and the plan can't just be aspirational. This is what if it's still you have to take action. It can't just be a statement. It has to be something you're genuinely gonna drive. And if most leaders know what their people are doing, and if you're doing the right things, your leader will know. And by the way, it just sets you up perfectly for the next quarter or the next month if you haven't quite hit the number this month.
Yeah. Changing tack slightly with the last question, but you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. But do you have anything that's happened during your career that's like super funny or like a slightly embarrassing fail? Hopefully, nothing really involving myself. But do you have anything that you want to share?
Well, it was not a fail, because I think I just talked about a potential fail. But the funniest and thing is, actually, before I was in proper IT setting, I sold as a college student electronic gadgets at Curry's, and we used to get paid a lot more for selling the insurance on an item than we did the actual item itself. And I remember selling a personal stereo for £10. This is a cassette thing that you used to play and carry around with you.
I actually know what it is, but I guess it's for the younger
you know what
audience.
it is.
Yeah.
It was £10, but the insurance was £20, and I somehow managed to convince this customer to buy the insurance for twice as much. And I did it I didn't believe that he would ever go for it, but I just sort of just tried, and he went for it. And I was a bit shocked. I probably should have said, well, actually, I can't, in all integrity, sell it to you. But anyway, I was super young then. But I guess the point of that message, it was really funny. We had a good laugh about it, but sometimes, it's just a matter of asking, right? If you don't ask, you don't get, and you'll be surprised what you can achieve. And in fact, most people will do you a favor if you ask in the right way, even if your natural instinct would be not to ask.
Yeah. So always ask, always be closing.
Exactly.
Thank you, Mark. I don't even know I knew that about you because I worked in Greens, which was equivalent in Debenhams when I was at college and what have you, and it was a really good fun experience. But as has this conversation been really good to speak and to catch up and hear your insights of your career, some selling best practice, lots of really good tips and insights, I think, for people there, and touching a bit on the kind of AI and technology topics. So thank you very much for your time today, Mike. It's been fantastic speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and it's great to see what you're doing now as well. So best of luck.
Thanks, Mike. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.
We really hope that you've enjoyed the discussion. You can find us at curvo.ai, connect with me or Leo on LinkedIn, and we'd love to hear your insights and perspective on how you found the discussion or even your own fresh thinking on the topic. We're also looking out for future guests as well. So please get in touch and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. Goodbye.